Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be discussing our next post-Brexit trade deal with the agreement with New Zealand that, like all the others, involves a greater benefit to the other side than ourselves, and that's according to the UK government, which might be being optimistic in its appraisal of the situation. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So as Georgia joins Ukraine in applying for EU membership this week, our own little plague island of lunatics still insists that being part of the select group of European countries that wants a distant relationship with the EU that includes us, Belarus, Russia, and well, that's it really. So another trade deal, another lesson in should have listened to trade experts rather than snake oil salesmen. Before leaving the EU, Brexiteers said we could get amazing trade deals on our own. Much better on our own than negotiating as part of this huge trade bloc. Now, there are two basic differences with arranging trade deals as an individual country as opposed to being part of a large trade bloc. One actually supports their view, but one opposes it. The supporting reality is that an independent country can focus in on aspects of trade that are important to them and the negotiating partner. In this way, we don't have to concede on goods or services that are not important to our economy. Fine, fair enough. But to counter that, we do not have as much buying power. When it comes to trade negotiations, the eventual deal is all about improving exports for your side, without conceding too much in the way of exports for the other. You want the overall package to be a net benefit for you. The central issue is that you want to make it easier to export into their market, but you don't want to make it easier for them to export into yours because that puts pressure on your own domestic businesses. Obviously, you have to open up your market a little bit in order to get the other side to open theirs, and here is where the buying power matters. If your market is worth a lot to the other side, you can get away with conceding less market access proportionally, because a small percentage boost to exports is worth more if it is for a wealthier market. So negotiating on behalf of a smaller market should mean having to concede more to the other side. And this has been what's happening. And there's a third factor to consider as well: time. We have been in a massive hurry to negotiate a lot of trade deals. With other countries, they may be at any one time negotiating one or two significant trade deals, and they'll conclude them when they're happy with them. Could take years, usually does take years. But Brexit Britain is trying to arrange lots at once and has made no secret of the fact that the government would like them completed quickly because the Daily Express keeps running out of things to say. So what does the New Zealand trade deal do for us? What does it do for New Zealand? And does it meet the test of a good deal for the UK? Well, for this, obviously, I'm going to be using the government's own assessment. After all, can't be any argument if I'm happy to go along with what the government think about their own trade deal, can there? So first of all, it concludes that it will be worth more to New Zealand than to the UK. They estimate it will result in a £0.7 billion boost to exports for the UK, but a £1 billion boost to exports for New Zealand. So straight away worth more to them than to us. And because New Zealand has a way smaller economy than the UK, and I mean way smaller, that means as a percentage GDP boost, it's even better for New Zealand than the UK. So it doesn't really matter whether you want to look at the percentage figure or a monetary figure. The UK government is openly stating that this deal is tilted significantly in favour of the other side. Not the best start. The second thing to do is to compare it to the Australia trade deal. Like when I reviewed that, I did some calculation to show that if we got an Australia level trade deal with every other country in the world, and that's not realistic with some, obviously we're not going to get a great trade deal with Russia these days, but we wouldn't get one with China, and we're currently struggling with the United States. But if we did, it would still not compensate for the accepted figure for the GDP loss of leaving the EU. In other words, getting the equivalent of the Australia level trade deal with every market on earth, we're still at a loss, net loss. So then you look at the New Zealand deal. How does it stack up to the Australia deal? Well, proportional to their own GDP. It's actually a better trade deal for us net in terms of the predicted growth to our GDP. However, New Zealand's GDP is so small that it still makes it a much less worthwhile deal for us in dollar terms. And it does sort of show we can get a better trade deal with a much smaller economy than we can with a larger one. So again, that demonstrates what I was talking about with the Australia video some time ago, that in actual fact we will not get a good one with the US or China, if that's even possible, which it probably isn't, and forget about Russia. Now, as with Australia, New Zealand is an agricultural nation. We already knew that the Australia deal is very damaging to British farming. British farmers have made no secret of that. And this New Zealand trade deal is no different from that point of view. The government's impact assessment reckons that British agriculture and food production will lose out to the tune of £145 million. It did read, I had to read it with grim humour. The report tried to cover for this by saying that the sectors may grow overall. The thing is that all of their impact assessments so far, you know, every time they've done a trade deal, except for when they were sort of predicting what might happen before we left the EU, but their impact assessments for the post-Brexit trade deals, every single one of them shows a reduction for farming and food industries. Every single one shows farming and food industries in Britain shrinking. So the reality is that there is no scope for these sectors to grow. And if you don't want to take my word for it, the government are unable to say how they expect it to grow. The New Zealand trade deal is going to hurt it. The Australia trade deal is going to hurt it. The US trade deal, when it comes along, will hurt it. You know, the Brexit deal, the EU deal, hurt it. Even in this report, it simply states that you can't rule out the fact that it might grow. It's like, yeah, well, this deal's going to shrink it, but it might grow in some other way. What other way? Well, I don't know. The report also, just as with the Australia trade deal, abandoned animal welfare and environmental standards. Animal welfare standards are only preserved for British farmers, but the deal allows New Zealand producers to export goods that are below the standard that British farmers are allowed to produce. Obviously, the impact of this will be most keenly felt by, the Australian imports, and even that could be dwarfed if the Tories remain in power to get their US trade deal in time. The president of the National Farmers Union is reported to have pointed out that the cumulative effect of all these deals is that British farmers face higher costs of production than their competitors abroad, including, of course, in Australia and New Zealand. And the consequence of this is that they will find it harder to compete with those cheaper imports, even given the cost of transporting them 12,000 miles. So how does the author of this report, or authors of this report, justify a trade agreement that will harm British producers? Go on, guess. Remember, this is free market conservatives we're talking about here. Yeah, that's right. They argue that, yes, there'll be increased competition, but increased competition is very good, you know, because it will make our domestic producers more innovative. It's their answer to everything. Beat people hard enough and they will magically become stronger, despite all the evidence that Brexit has thrown our way already. In terms of the benefits to us, the people, I love the independents' take on it. It worked out that if the government's figures were correct, it would be worth about £12 per person by 2035. £12 per person by 2035. And I will point out that the report stressed a lot of times that it might not actually be as much as that. You know, I cannot tell you how many times this report, the government's own report, said it might not grow as much as that. We're calculating this, but it might not be that. Now consider this, as a result of our Brexit government alone, quite aside from external factors, our energy bills have gone up by hundreds of pounds that would not have been the case otherwise. You know, I don't just mean because of the extra cost of gas, I mean just in terms of the Brexit effect. And that doesn't even consider the increase in the cost of food or fuel or the reduction in consumer choice. And that's the thing to consider here. As a result of Brexit, we are all poorer to the tune of hundreds of pounds a year at least, because I ought to include in that, of course, tax rises to help pay for Brexit. And that's already happened. That reduction in real terms money, income, has already happened. That's not something that's going to happen by 2035. It's already there now. And it will continue to get worse. And when you look at these Brexit trade deal impact assessments, they all talk about these benefits that amount to a few pounds. And they don't add up to anywhere near the losses. And we don't get them for a decade or more. This is talking about another decade and a half before we get them. The report talked about their figures being based on wage growth of somewhere between 0.02% and 0.03% by 2035. That's in real terms, of course. Now, consider that real terms wages have gone down during the Conservatives' time in office. And no, I don't just mean, because of COVID years. No, if you stop at the time the pandemic hit, we were still on a real terms income reduction in this country since the Conservatives came to office. So we have a government whose policies actually shrink our incomes in real terms. So if they're trying to say, well, you'll get this benefit if wages grow in real terms by this amount, that means that their calculations for growth can't possibly come true unless we get a lot of years of non-Tory governments between now and 2035. Frankly, the best hope for any real terms wage increase by 2035 is following the path of kicking the Tories out, proportional representation to keep them out, at least keep the extreme ones out, rejoining the single market and customs union, then eventually the EU proper again. And the other thing to point out was that the mathematical logic looked a bit odd to me. Now, I can't be sure because they didn't detail their methodology, but it seemed odd to me they were using exactly the same figures for GDP boost as wage growth. I don't know if their calculations are based on the long discredited trickle-down theory, because why are they suggesting that wage growth will be the same as GDP boost? Unless they're trying to suggest that when there's a growth in the economy, that it all trickles down and everyone benefits to the same amount, or at least on average. But that doesn't happen. We know that doesn't happen. And if that's what they're doing, their figures are really going to be a massive overestimation. And finally, it also trumpeted the benefits of slashing red tape. Again, I will have to point out that slightly reducing red tape when trading with a small economy thousands of miles away is not a benefit when you have massively increased it with the huge and wealthy market on our doorstep. Also, you'll notice if you read the report that they talk about minimising red tape. Still there. There's no claim that it's going to disappear. So what they're selling is slightly easier paperwork for sending goods to New Zealand, where there can be no great prospect for growth, even if they were somehow desperate to dump their Pacific-produced goods and switch to British ones instead, because it's a country of 5 million people, 12 million miles away. And unlike the UK, New Zealand is not making their own businesses produce goods more expensively than UK businesses in order to give us a leg up with our exports to them. And again, we come back to the figures which show that New Zealand gets way more benefit from this than we do. In summary, this trade deal exists purely to let the Daily Express claim another Brexit win, just as with everything Brexit. Now that reality is here, it's all about the show. People's living standards will fall, the government will blame some other factors. Businesses will find it harder to compete and they will be blamed for not innovating. I think Boris Johnson should be made to demonstrate how innovating your way out of the impossible works. Put him in a 20-metre deep pit full of hungry tigers and tell him to innovate his way out of it. But of course this will not occur. Apparently it would breach his human rights while we still have them. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.